Call to order the regular Planning Commission meeting of the Charter Township of Oxford dated February 10th, 2022. And if we could all rise and pay our respects to the flag, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Susan, if you would note the roll, we have two people absent tonight with excused absences.
Okay. Noted.
We have Ross and Mr. Hunt are not here this evening. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion. I move to adopt the agenda as presented with the addition of new business items 9B. The topic of that will be Ordinance Review Committee Zoning Ordinance Amendment Priority List for 2022.
I'll second.
We have a motion to approve the present agenda with an addition to add information for ORC for funding for continuing to implement some ORC changes to the ordinances made by Mr. Knoll, seconded by Mr. Spiz. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion approved. This conflict of interest, Susan.
Yes, sir.
Do we have? We just have to ask.
Yeah. If there's anybody that
if there is anybody
has any conflict with anything that's on the agenda.
Is there anybody that has conflict with anything on the agenda?
Sure.
No.
Nobody here?
Just for reference, I live in a home built by Clearview, but that was 6 years ago, so it's been a while.
That's not a conflict of
It
interest.
shouldn't be, but I just want to make it.
If it is, there's a lot of people in Oxford that have
That's
conflict.
conflict.
Yes. But they don't necessarily sit on the board.
True.
Okay, I think I get what conflict of interest could possibly be, but I don't think there's anybody here that's involved with financial concerns or something like that. Can I have the approval of the minutes from the regular meeting of 1/27/22?
I move, Mr. Chair, to approve the minutes of the Planning Commission regular meeting of 1/27/2022.
I'll second.
Motion by Mr. Knoll to approve the minutes and seconded by Mr. Spiz. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Is there anyone here from the public that would like to make comments on items that are not scheduled on tonight's meeting? Which means, you know, we're going to have this evening's meeting with new business, but so there are no people in the audience that want to make comments. Seeing none, we'll move on to unfinished business, which we have none. New business tonight, we're going to start with a preliminary site plan proposed new development called Sanitary Hills, located on the south of the East Drainer Road between Tullymore Circle and Shepherd's Lane. Is the petitioner here to represent that?
Yes.
Would you like to start with that, please?
Sure. Thank you, Board. As you stated, we're here for preliminary site plan approval. Sanctuary Hills. We were in a few months ago for a rezone, which was approved. We're submitting under the open space option. As you can see on the screen, we did what we talked about doing in the rezone. We kept the community to kind of the natural northern area, kept as much of the natural features as humanly possible. We're able to get 85 units into the space you see, and believe we've addressed pretty much all of the concerns and items that were brought up by the reviews. We had previously submitted, got a round of reviews. There was a few comments on the initial that we wanted to address, so we pulled off the first preliminary site plan. Meeting never actually made it here, address those items so that we would come in here kind of with a clean slate and already addressed a lot of the review comments.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Can I ask the speaker to identify himself?
Oh, yes.
No, sorry. Eric Knesny, Clearview Homes.
Thank you.
I think at this time, if we have Zach, would you like to present your documents that you have in regards to this development? Before we go into any comments.
Try to do my quick version here. So as mentioned, this is a preliminary approval for a site condominium. Preliminary approval is a test for fit to see is it consistent with what they're trying to do, and is it likely that all the things can fit in there how they're doing. It only grants the applicant the right to apply for final site plan. So throughout my report, there are a lot of kind of issues that are to be addressed in the final site plan. I won't touch on those so much. They're not essential for the review tonight. And a site condominium, for those in the audience who haven't been following planning and zoning law for the past 20 years, is basically a subdivision. It's just a fancy way that it's called because it uses a different enabling legislation. So open space preservation is something new for Oxford Township, at least in terms of an actual development. When we were looking through the records, we couldn't see any of these before. But it is something that is required by the state for communities with certain development densities to allow the option. The idea is that whatever number of lots you could create using a regular development plan, you get the right to do them on half of the property. And so the idea behind that is that the benefit is to the community, you get a large area that's preserved in an undeveloped state, and benefit for the developer is that they don't have to build as many elements of the infrastructure. You get to build half the roads, kind of that type of thing. So as mentioned, there was a zoning map amendment. It's a relatively large site, roughly 126 acres net, with significant frontage along Drainer. As mentioned in the report, the properties do currently extend just north of Drainer, but if this is approved and it goes forward, the portion north of Drainer will be attached to the Crossroads for Youth property, and the weird boundary that doesn't follow the road is just an artifact of how it was originally divided and the fact that there's water there. The property is within the water and sewer district. I'll allow Mr. Sharp to address that more. It is in the R3 single family residential district, which is residential uses are permitted and the open space preservation option is permitted. The quick highlights, I am on page 6 now with the table there. So there are a couple different columns, and there's kind of two things you're going to be looking at here. The first question for you is whether or not the conventional plan is feasible. I'm looking at a page of my report. So for the conventional plan to be deemed feasible, you don't necessarily need all the details about how large the stormwater system is, or if there are 99 trees instead of 103 trees. Can you look at this and see this could be developed? So we've looked at it, and as you see there, all of the lots provided in the conventional plan meet the minimum lot area, the minimum lot width, and do have buildable area. Some of them are very wonky shaped, but there is spot to put a typical house within them. It does require some filling of state regulated wetlands, but our view, and I believe Mr. Sharp's view, is that the amount of filling is likely to receive a permit from Eagle that would be required for the conventional plan. So with the open space preservation option, the lots can get as small as half the size and half the width, but the setbacks remain unchanged. So if you see in the proposed open space preservation column, all of the proposed lots meet that. We do note below that there are some lots that are very, very tight with the setbacks, but are possible to build acceptable or expected size houses for the area. The site will have access from Drainer to the north with 2 points. Eventually that will require review and approval by the Road Commission of Oakland County. The drive to the west is aligned with the driveway for Crossroads for Youth. We like it when those driveways are aligned because it reduces traffic conflicts, and if the property to the north is ever developed, they can have that alignment again for reduced conflicts. It does have within it curbs and gutters and sidewalks. There's some minor comments to make the sidewalks a little more consistent for pedestrian safety. The one thing that we do want to note is for the number of units here, a traffic impact study is required. The traffic impact study that was submitted is shown for 75 units, which was an earlier version of the plan. The plan before you has 85. So this body, in making its decision, one of your discussions is whether or not you feel that plan is close enough, or that traffic impact study is close enough, or if you want it to be revised. We'll refer further comments on circulation to the Township Engineer and Fire Chief, who are both here. One thing is that the plan shows where a safety path could go along Drainer. My understanding is the applicants don't want to put that in, but rather do the payment in lieu. It is a rather large chunk, so some places may be difficult to put in, but it's something that we would recommend gets installed either as part of this project or the township be sure that it can put one in the future. For essential services and utilities, the utilities throughout will be buried except for your typical boxes. As mentioned, it will be within a municipal water and sanitary sewer district, so there should be no on-site wells or septic systems on the property. And stormwater will be managed on-site. It'll be directed to a couple forebays and then eventually flow out to existing water bodies and wetlands. The landscaping appears generally consistent with what's required for the zoning ordinance. The one thing that we note is that there are some areas where there's a lot of trees of the exact same species, and as we've observed with pests and diseases and other things, we'd like to mix it up a little bit more. Again, just a minor detail that can be addressed in the final site plan. There's no lighting shown currently. One other thing for landscaping, sorry, is that the final site plan will have to show irrigation for landscaping along Drainer. That's one of your zoning ordinance requirements. The current plan does not show lighting. That's something that will have to be added if there are street lights throughout the development. There is a proposed sign. It appears that they are consistent with the height, area, and location for entrance signs. And details for traffic control signs are also in there. That's usually something we don't see until final site plan, so it's good to see that early. We do suspect, because of the road width, that Fire Chief Pete is going to want to have no parking signs on one side of the road. Usually it's the side where the fire hydrants are. Now I'm going to go into some of the open space preservation language here. So, as I said, there needs to be a conventional plan that's included on the back part of this package, sheets 10 and 11. That conventional plan shows 86 lots, and it appears that all of those lots are consistent with the zoning standards for the R3 district as it exists. Mentioned some of the fill, but we believe it could be feasibly built. For minimum open space, you would think that would be an easy thing to calculate, but it's actually a bit complex. There are things that get included and not included. Based on our calculations that we've run through and that they have provided, it does provide more open space that's been required. There's a sticky bit about whether or not the right-of-way for drainers is included. The applicants have confirmed that they intend to dedicate that to the Road Commission of Oakland County, so that's a moot point. So it does appear to meet the minimum open space. And there are certain things that qualify as open space. It believes that all of the calculations they've had are consistent with the standards for what you can include. So for the open space, remember, you need to kind of, as a body, determine that that conventional plan seems feasible. Some other guidance. So for tonight, this body, you're the body that approves preliminary site plans. You can approve it, you can not approve it, you could postpone it, you could approve it with conditions, and that just provides the applicant the ability to apply for a final site plan, which is reviewed by this body with the recommendation given to the Township Board. A round of here decisions and terminations and findings for you to make tonight is if the conventional plan appears feasible, whether or not the supplied traffic study is adequate or if it should be revised. And one of the things I didn't touch on in the earlier review is whether or not there needs to be additional access points or paths in the open space. So one of your standards says that the open space has to be accessible. They do show the path coming into a portion of it. Again, just for discussion, for you to give guidance for the applicants as they make revisions for the final site plan. A couple of potential conditions is either the safety path is added or the payment in lieu of construction is granted. Various other approvals from entities, and pre-application conference before submission of a final site plan. And in your packet, there's also draft resolution for you to work through, and that's what I've got.
That was the short version?
That was as short as I can get it, sorry.
That's what you said, you were going to give us a short version. Jim, would you like to make a comment at this time, please?
I'm going to go long.
Okay, thank you.
Tom, I'd like to commend you on your IT skills here tonight. Very good, very good.
Trying to keep up a little bit, not well.
You should all be in receipt of our review letter dated January 21st, 2022. Again, I'm just going to kind of hit some of the high points here. They did provide a preliminary grading plan, and everything seems sufficient in that regards. More detail as they work their way through the process into the final engineering. Sanitary sewer, as Zach had mentioned, this property was added to the township's water and sewer district with the caveat that improvements were made to a pump station that is across the street. The township board has allocated the funds to proceed with that. We have been in design with the WRC to make those improvements, and I believe that the applicant has indicated that they will make a contribution towards the construction of that pump station.
So where it does say in the plans, it says new sanitary pump station to be constructed by others. So when that's on there that way, you're talking about then the township's responsibility is for that.
That is correct. We are doing the design work in conjunction with the WRC. We will be bidding the project as a township project and constructing it as a township project.
Does it only pick up what's necessary for the use of this property or additional properties?
This pump station was originally designed back in, I believe, the early 90s for the Lake Villa mobile home facility that's out there. Since that time, other developments have come online, Willow Lake, all the way up to the high school that comes through this pump station. So improvements were needed to be made anyhow, and they were kind of slated, not on this timeline, but with the development coming in, we bumped up the timeline a little bit because, in order to service their needs as well as the improvements that were needed to be made to the pump station for the overall community.
Okay. So there's no problem with any demand for usage then? Okay.
No, it has more to do with storage and meeting the requirements that Eagle has nowadays, so that we don't end up with any sanitary sewer overflows and stuff. The way that the station was designed 30 years ago, it just is out of compliance right now. Some other things. So, but once the Camp Oakland pump station improvements are completed, the pump station will have the capacity to service this development, and as I mentioned before, it helps out the whole East District that this is in. So with regards to the water, also they were added, as I mentioned, to the water district back in November. There's a 16-inch main that was constructed, brought down through the Crossroads for Youth Development at Beats Tullamore, and they will be connecting onto the 16-inch water line, extending it along Drainer Road to a certain distance, up to probably about where the pond is, out there near Drainer Road, and then they're looping internally with 8-inch water main, which meets the township requirements.
So when you say, you're talking about extending that water main easterly?
Yeah, they're going to be extending it easterly in the event that sometime in the future the township decides they want to take that water line further down.
Do they take it to their property line, or do they stop prior to that?
We're going to have them just stop it at the around where the pond is. We're not going to have it take it because no, we're not going to have them go all the way down because there's
a detention basin right there, right?
Exactly.
And somewhere past that?
Right about there, Tom. Right about
where the arrow is?
Yep.
All right.
Yeah. We don't see the need for the water main line extending in the very near future, but we want to have it prepared in case.
And that's outside of the road right of way? Or I mean, excuse me, the roadway?
It will be in the road right of way.
In the road right of way, but outside, will it be under the road?
It will not be under the road.
Okay, that's my question, all right.
Zach had mentioned with, with regards to the stormwater drainage, they're proposing, curbed roadways, catch basins that will go into piping that will go down to the detention pond, which then outlet into the wetlands.
Are those mountable curbs?
I would assume they would be mountable, yes.
Okay.
They can just drive right over into there.
Anywhere where they need to on the properties, right? Okay.
Correct. They are planning some pretreatment devices too, as well, to filter out all the contaminants before they would enter any wetlands.
All right.
With regards to the pavements, sidewalks, curbing, again, Zach had mentioned 2 access point. They will need approval from the road commission for those access points there. These will be internal private roadways, so
Once they're in the site.
once you get into the site, they will be internal private roadways, so that will be reviewed by the township, by us, and not necessarily through the road commission there. However, the proposed pavement cross-section that they show with the asphalt and the curbing does meet the township standards.
So you're talking 27 feet wide and mountable curbs and all that?
I'm gonna go off memory, Tom, and say yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's
27
pretty much county standard too?
It is our standard.
Yeah.
For the most part, they pretty much mimic what
All right.
the county has out there.
Because everybody parks in roadways now. Oh, never mind, Pete.
I don't know, Tom. Why do we park on driveways and drive on parkways? I don't know. So, there will be condominium, so there will be master deeds, bylaws, all sorts of easements and things in place, and they've been down that road on a couple developments. So hopefully they have that in their back pocket with regards to what Ms. Morrison is going to be looking for. And with regards to the conventional plan that Zach alluded to, they have to provide a plan that is somewhat realistic over the entire property.
That's an overlay.
In order to get this. And, in our opinion, they might, it's not insurmountable to perceive that they would have been able to develop that. The entire property. They might need, because the crest in the middle, they might have needed some pump stations for sanitary sewer, which, jumping back to that, I mean, in my opinion, that's a good thing, instead of a whole bunch of septics over this property with all the wetlands and lakes that you have around there. I think that having it sewered is a much better product. So, but overall, we're recommending approval of the preliminary site plan, and if you have any additional questions, I can answer them.
Mr.
I
Smith?
do have one. You may have touched on it. For the stormwater runoff, is that a WRC approved owned, or is it going to be also by the homeowners association?
Say that again,
The
Mike?
stormwater runoff, I'm assuming it runs off into detention basin. Who's responsible for maintaining that?
There'll be a maintenance agreement for the HOA, just like there are typically
Well,
with the township.
There's detention A and detention B from what I recollect when I looked through the plans earlier.
But there's always caveats in there that should they not live up to the requirements, then the township has the rights to go in and do the work and bill the association.
I mean, it's out of the ordinary, but do you know any of the soil types in there right now? I do not. So who's to say what kind of percolation will be there or anything else? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not.
You done some studies already?
I would think that's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, from everything we've seen, it's all pretty sandy.
Yeah,
Typical.
Typical Oxford.
Typical Oxford.
I don't know if you saw Tullamore when it was being built, but that was beautiful beach sand next door there. So
Yeah.
I assume this will be very similar except for the wetland areas.
Okay.
Any other questions by any of the
Do any of the
commissioners?
planning commissioners have any other questions? None at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Schultz, would you like to make a comment, please?
Evening. The roads names are fine, I'm okay with those. Hydrant locations are fine. I did make original comments on for our first go around, yes, we do have to have no parking on the hydrant side of the streets. And then when the drawing came in, it did not have it on there, so as part of my comments in the review, you'll see that I did say that they do have to have no parking signs on it.
Well, you'll determine that when at a later date. Okay, and once we get into a more of a final site
Yes.
plan approval process. All right.
But otherwise, everything else is fine.
Okay, good. Planning commissioners, members, any comments at this time, questions, concerns for anybody?
I can confirm that it is loamy sands according to the USDA Web Soil Survey.
Thank you, Zach. All right. I'm just curious, I mean, sometimes we get a little bit of awkwardness, and I mean, once in a while we find a place where we got some clay and some other stuff and some loam and whatnot. I don't know where it comes from. Oxford doesn't typically have it all. But I wasn't here for the glacial age, so not quite.
Just missed it, huh?
Yeah, just missed it. I guess if I'm seeing,
Sure.
yes, Mr. Nolan?
Any ask questions? Or?
I guess if I don't see any other questions.
Okay. I've got some questions for Zach to clarify the traffic impact study. Not to put you on the spot, but it's been done with how many homes?
75 homes in the traffic impact study.
And we're running 86 now?
85.
85 with the open space plan.
In your years of experience, is that a big number between 75 and 85 for traffic study?
The rule of thumb is a typical single-family house is expected to generate 10 trips per day. So I should be over here. So again, the conventional wisdom would be that there would be an additional 100 trips. My experience has been that if you're on dirt roads, there tends to be a little fewer trips because people don't want to drive on dirt roads as often as they want to drive on paved roads. Just observations. So people will chain trips. So they'll go to the post office and the grocery store and the other place instead of making independent trips. But rule of thumb would be about 100 more trips.
For those other 10 sites.
Correct.
So is it eminent then the youth would request another study?
That's for this body. So,
Well, that's what I think John's trying to get to.
Thank you. That's where I'm going.
John's trying to say, do we need to request another traffic study? I would think for the 10 home sites, I wouldn't necessarily think it would have to be possible.
I would agree.
And so we would have to take an opinion from the board before we send this forward, so.
The reason I'm asking the question is over the past few months, I've heard about the amount of traffic that is on that section of road. Why isn't that section of road paved from Tullamore up? We're going a little farther than Tullamore now. We're going to put more homes in what Tullamore has. So that's why I'm bringing that up.
The discussion of pavement is a different discussion.
I understand that. I'm talking about traffic, just flow of cars. You're correct.
yeah. So
Unless they like to pave the road.
Mr. Sharp could speak to this, but for me, the most important element of traffic studies is geometry at certain points. And I don't believe the 10 additional houses would affect the geometry where these come off from drainer. It's similar volumes as far as the designs of those features go.
Then I guess I'll go with the board pleasures on that.
Okay.
Thank you, Zach.
Mr. Turner, anybody else?
Well, I brought it up in a previous discussion, but has anything been done to test the water level in the ground?
Groundwater level?
Yes.
No.
Do you have any fear with all the wetlands around that the water will come up
No, we're
to
far.
the surface?
No, that's one of the advantages again of doing this open space plan, is that we're able to stay far enough away from them versus if we went with the conventional plan, we would have been much closer to a lot of the wetlands. And there's quite a bit of topography in the community,
Yes.
and a decent amount of rise and fall in between where the wetlands actually are and where the homes will be placed. So we don't have any concerns with that.
Right. I just don't want to see somebody have a basement and a year later they've got all kinds of water problems.
Sure.
Because the water table has come
Sure.
up.
It's not a concern here.
Because I know the existing buildings that are there today are basically on high spots.
Sure.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, to know the questions, I would rather.
Well, I would like to make sure, Mr. Bailey, do you
Well, I'm good. My only question was about the traffic study.
Before you read in your 4-page resolution there,
Yeah.
do we need to make a decision or have a discussion about the open space plan compared to conventional for this, or no? Does everybody agree with the conventional, or have
I-
the open space?
Okay, I'll give you my opinion first, and then if anybody has
What
questions.
everybody feels.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. My opinion is, when I looked at the additional plan that could be done as an overlay to this, and then I talked to actually Zach earlier in regards to the number of units that could be put on the property, I don't have a problem, because to cluster it in this way and leave all the open space around it, I think what everybody talked about, it is more beneficial to do it this way because of all the wetlands and the activity area that's there. So I looked at the overlay, then I looked back at the 85 units, and I don't have a problem with it. As long as all the other conditions can be met through engineering, the other conditions can be met through the planning and zoning components, I'm okay with this right now. But let other people talk in regards to it if they still have concerns.
Anybody else?
The point of clarity, when you had the first call to public, I believe the instruction was that it was for items not on the agenda.
Yes.
So there may be folks who may want to speak who didn't speak at that time.
Oh, I can ask for public comment. Is there anybody here from the public that would like to speak in regards to this development? Yes or no? If there is someone, please come to the podium.
All right, I'll be shy.
Okay.
Just a couple of questions. Michael Pieter, 319 Indian Lake. Doesn't look as bad as I thought it might, so I appreciate that. Just two questions, I guess, because I don't understand the zoning. Can there be a phase 2 where you build the 85 and then you want another 50?
No.
And then the second question is with the with all the open space, is that going to remain? This is probably more a question for you guys because you're not going to go through paving trails and all this other stuff. Does it just sit the way it is, or do you guys as a board say, hey, we need to make it accessible to every Tom, Dick, and Harry out there, make it like a park?
No, this
Or
would
just
be
stay the way it is?
This would be a development within this property that would be their property.
Okay.
So all the open space that goes with it goes with the all the lots that are adjacent and contiguous with this development, and that's their open space.
Okay.
Now, there wouldn't be any way to get to it any other way. It's private property
Got it.
and private streets.
Well, it would have homeowners association that could put trails or something through that area if they so choose at their own cost.
Well, that would be up to them.
Correct, it'd be up to them.
Perfect.
That would
Okay.
be
I just want to make sure you guys were going to force upon them.
No.
Hey, make this into a pretty park with ponds and
No.
flamingos and things. Okay, cool.
I'd like to see it.
Thank you.
Personally, I'd like to see it stay more natural. But
Agreed.
And I'm also, I agree with Commissioner Berger here that the open space plan to me is a preferable plan, just for the additional green space that it maintains.
I think we might be ready now, John.
Well, I have a motion.
But I think
It's
you
rather
do.
lengthy.
I'm gonna set it in front of me and I'll let
Can
you.
you do the short version?
I'd love to, believe it. Oxford Township Planning Commission, this is a resolution for preliminary site plan and open space preservation for Sanctuary Hills. A resolution for a preliminary site plan open space preservation for residential site condominium submitted by Lisa Slackton on behalf of Clearview Homes for property located at 930 East Drainer Road, south of Drainer between Tullamore Circle and Shepherd's Lane, section 36 of Oxford Township. Partial number ID 0436100001/002. Whereas Lisa Slackington, applicant on behalf of Clearview Homes, pursuant to the provisions of the Oxford Township zoning ordinance, submitted an application for preliminary site plan open space preservation for Sanctuary Hills on January 7, 2022. And whereas the applicant submitted a 14-page site plan on January 7, 2022, with a last revision date of December 20th, 2021, prepared and stamped by Jason Imran, a licensed professional engineer. And whereas the Planning Commission has received a report from Zach Michelle, planning consultant, dated January 24th, 2022, and whereas the Planning Commission received a report from Jim Sharp, engineering consultant, dated January 21, 2022, and whereas the Planning Commission has received a report from Pete Schultz, Oxford Fire Department Chief, dated January 24th, 2022, and whereas the Planning Commission has received a report from Susan Morrison, Township Attorney, dated January 25, 2022, and whereas the site is located within the R3 Single-Family Residential District, and whereas the single-family residential is a permitted use in an R3 Single-Family Residential District, and where the open space preservation development option is available within the R3 Single-Family Residential District, and whereas the site is located within an established public water and sanitary sewer district, and whereas the Planning Commission at its February 10, 2022 meeting reviewed the applicant for preliminary site plan and open space preservation of Sanctuary Hills and did not receive any public comment. Excuse me. We did receive, thank you, we did receive public comment or public input. Whereas the Planning Commission finds that the development will provide more than a minimum space, whereas the Planning Commission finds that the development will provide more than a minimal open space requirement as outlined in 6.14A, minimum space required, 6.14B, and 6.14C of the zoning ordinance, and whereas the Planning Commission finds that the provided space will be consistent with the standard of 6.14D1 of the zoning ordinance, and whereas the open space preservation calls for reduction of lot width and a lot area upon up to a 50% from what is required in the R3 single-family residential district as allowed in 6.14E lot size reduction, and whereas the Planning Commission finds that the conventional plan is feasible or would be feasible with minor modification, whereas the Planning Commission finds that the provided traffic impact study is adequate, whereas the preliminary site plan Sanctuary Hills meets or would meet the standards of 12.05A through 12.050 of the zoning ordinance site plan approval standards. And whereas the Planning Commission has authority to approve or deny preliminary site plans as provided in section 12.3C Planning Commission actions of the zoning ordinance, and whereas approval of a preliminary site plan allows an applicant to submit a final site plan, and now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission, by the majority vote at a duly noticed regular meeting held this 10th day of February 2022, approves the preliminary site plan and open space preservation Sanctuary Hills for property located at 930 East Drainer Road, south of Drainer between Tullamore Circle and Shepherd's Lane, section 36 of Oxford Township. Lot identification 0436100001/002 to the applicant subject to the conditions listed below. A, approval of the open space preservation development option shall be contingent on receiving a final site plan approval. B, comments identified in a consultant and agency review shall be addressed in the final site plan. C, the applicant shall participate in a pre-application conference with the township and interested agencies before submitting a final site plan. And D, the preliminary site plan approval shall expire and be of no effect after 365 days following approval. And I offer this as a resolution.
I'll second. Even though I should have to read it again.
No, we will not read it again. Everybody has a copy, I believe, a hard copy in front of them. I followed it through.
Request the chair to read it before the
They
meeting.
went almost
Can you
word for
repeat the
word.
motion, please?
So wait a minute. I'm not going to repeat the motion. Everybody has a hard copy. The motion was made by Noel, Mr. Noel, and supported by Mr. Spiz. We have a motion on the floor for approval. That was the last comment he made of this preliminary site plan. And it shall take and be in effect for no longer than 365 days from the following approval. I like to point that out because sometimes things slip up and things don't get going in time, and the next thing you know, time goes by faster than people think, and it could expire. So I like to point that out. And if there are no other questions in regards to this motion, I'd like to have a roll call vote though.
Bailey?
Yes.
Turner?
Yes.
Noel?
Yes.
Spiz?
Yes.
Berger?
Yes.
Motion passed.
Okay, the motion was approved. Thank you so much for your time and effort.
Thank you.
It was a little lengthy. I thought that was supposed to be the short version. That's what he said, didn't he?
No, I tried to get through the short version.
Oh, he tried to get it. We do have an amendment to tonight's agenda, which is now under new business as D. And it is for the funding for some ORC commitments to try and move forward that we want to make recommendations for approval from the Township Board. So do you want to make that? Does anybody
If there are any
understand?
questions, I would suggest that Zach entertain them.
You can make the motion and I'll.
I was going to let him make the motion, and then if there was discussion, we would go from there.
I move to forward
This is
the
the
order.
first we've seen it.
Oh, the first we've seen it.
Right.
Well, not for me.
Not for you, but for everybody else here. What am I looking at? What is in this package? And
Well, can we make the motion and then discuss it?
it's hard
Do
for
you
me
want
to-
to discuss it?
it's hard for me
Okay,
to second
Zach,
this.
you might as well come over
Okay,
and discuss
it depends how strict your parliamentarian is. So I wanted
Mr.
to,
Spiz demanding.
It's hard with this bunch.
I know. I haven't heard supporting
It's
yet.
different
though.
for every meeting, so.
I do want to say for the folks here who are interested, the reason why there was a condition that open space preservation isn't completely wrapped up until final site plan is because there has to be language in a master deed that preserves the open space in perpetuity. So as a question, is it ever going to be developed? Part of the open space says it can never be, and that language is usually finalized as part of the master deed document, which comes at final site plan. So that's where we had that in there. All right, to the Ordinance Review Committee Zoning Ordinance Amendment Priority List for 2022. So you guys have a very robust process for figuring out and checks and balances on your zoning ordinance amendment process and what you're going to put resources to, which is really good. One of the things we talked about at Ordinance Review Committee at the end of last year was potentially having a joint meeting where Planning Commission, Township Board, ZBA gets to talk together about what things you wanted to do. With this whole Omicron thing, we decided that probably wasn't a good idea, so that'll be off for the future. So the Ordinance Review Committee has been looking at a couple of priorities, things that have been identified. It's housekeeping, things that staff have identified, things that township officials have brought to us to work on for this coming year. Our current priority list is almost bare, which is a really good thing. Your folks on Ordinance Review Committee have been working really hard to get that list way down. So a couple of things, we have them traditionally grouped in different levels of how important is it for us to get at these. And group ones are the ones we're generally actively working at right now. So the things that the Ordinance Review Committee forwarded to this body to consider and forward to the Township Board for the funding is the zoning map maintenance. We're almost done with that currently. So it's been a long time since the township had looked at its zoning map and seen where the zoning doesn't match the use or the future land use. So that's just in the final phase. A couple of things that have come up on here is the planned unit development standards. So planned unit developments can be a really good tool for the community. They provide developments that tend to be better quality and have higher amenities for the residents and the township in general. You do have one planned unit development in the township, but usually that number is much higher. And as we were looking through it, the reason why you don't is it's really difficult to do. And so the balance of carrots and sticks is more towards the sticks, and so folks haven't been doing that. part of your master plan's goals, it says we want to encourage more planned unit developments because we know there are large pieces of property that are going to be developed in the near future. So that was kind of on our list. There is a project pending that is interested in using the planned unit development option, but they have identified that it's challenging to do as it exists now, and they're ready and waiting for this to happen. Do you want me to run through them all at once? And
I think all at once.
Okay. For the site plan review, there's a couple of things that can be tightened and improved. So one, for example, is, as you'll recall, we put a table in the schedule of uses instead of a bunch of paragraphs of text. Right now, in the site plan article, you have a bunch of paragraphs of text that say, here are the things you need to do on your site plan for preliminary, and then another section that says for final, and then a bunch of text for what your criteria is. One of the goals is to make the zoning ordinance as easy to use as possible. So we're going to look at changing that to tables because it takes up much less space and it's a lot easier to see what's going on. Another example of identified improvements are right now, final site plan is only valid for 180 days. You have to get your permits and shovel in the ground within 180 days, or you have to come back through and get reapproval. 180 days, or 365 days, rather.
Yeah, you threw me off.
Yep,
right now
yep.
it's 365,
Yep.
and I brought that up earlier.
Yeah, my apologies. I got a flip there.
Yeah, okay.
Seems like a very long time, but with mobilization, and we have folks here, that time can get eaten up very quickly because you have to get final approvals from all these agencies, you have to get the financing, you need to get contractors. And so we recommend exploring extending that another 180 days with options for some extensions on there. And the idea is that there's check reviews that as long as there haven't been developed or substantial changes in the area, that there's no value for the Planning Commission looking at the same thing if nothing's changed. So exploring ways to do that. Another thing that we've identified for the site plan article is administrative site plans. Right now you have a list of things that can be approved by staff without coming to the Planning Commission, but it's a very limited list. And there's been interest in exploring additional things that can be done with that. Residential accessibility ramps. So as I mentioned in there, if you build a ramp for grandma, the zoning ordinance says that is a deck. And decks need to meet the setbacks for the principal structure, and anyone who's built a deck knows that it's really, really long because you have to go 12 to 1. And so that can be a challenge to build in most places with meeting setbacks. So someone will say, well, just get a variance. The reason for the ramp with the long run is based on the person, not the property. So what we're looking at here is allowing language to allow them to extend into required setbacks if that's the only option without having to go administrative review. I can tell you it's really, really awful to tell someone who's bringing grandma home from surgery because she broke her hip that you can't put up a ramp. Sorry. A couple of other things, kind of minor things. Residential architectural standards. You have some standards about slope and overhangs and what materials you can use for your roof. And right now, it is not legal according to the zoning ordinance to put a standing seam metal roof on your house in Oxford Township. We got them. I can tell you they're really nice and they're really expensive because I put the second most expensive thing I bought on top of the most expensive thing I bought. I put a metal roof on my house. And so we're looking at kind of matching that to what today's expectations are. Projections and setback exceptions. The idea with that is right now your zoning ordinance is pretty strict where it says the setback is a setback for everything on the building. But there are cases where a bay window or a bump out for a gas fireplace or an overhang may be okay to extend into that in some cases because it's not going to affect the bulk of the house or encourage fire to jump from one to the other. So that's what that one is. The history and amendment table. If you crack open your zoning ordinance now, you're not going to find any information on there about when it was amended and how many amendments and which sections were amended. If you want to know that, you have to catch Clerk Wright and ask him. And then he tells other people to do it. Well, he's good with the research, but the idea with that is we want to incorporate some sort of listing of, we changed this with this amendment on this date, and here are the sections. Very useful for staff because you can immediately go and find that. Sign standards, they are still in the group 1. We know that the current standards are not likely consistent with Reed versus Gilbert. The ORC had a draft prepared that was compliant, and then a case popped up in Troy, and the township attorney said, let's sit back and see what the court does with this case. That was in October 2020. So they told us to still kind of wait on that.
Well, that's just in holding right now.
Yes.
We still have that in place.
Yep. So that's still in group 1. You know, the court could decide in a month, it could decide in a year. Some other things that have been identified, these are lower priority driveway standards for accessibility. This came up when we were looking at the driveway standards for the setbacks and the apron width. A lot of communities have language that says if you've got a driveway longer than, is it 300 feet, the magical number? If you've got a long driveway, we want to make sure it's wide enough and has horizontal clearance that we can get fire apparatus back in there. Because if it catches on fire and we have to bring the hose and put up a little swimming pool to pump the water, you're not going to have a house at the end of the day. So that's what we're looking at there for driveway standards for accessibility. For landscaping standards, right now there's not language to describe here are trees that we want you to plant, here are trees we don't want you to plant. That's pretty common for disease, or if you don't want to have a bunch of berry trees on top of a parking lot. And there's not real language in there now for incentivizing tree preservation, except for you don't have to plant a tree. There are ways you can adjust the language and formula to try to encourage that even more. That's something we're proposing to look at. Group 3 items. Mixed-use zoning, this has been group 3 for quite some time because other things have popped up and it's a lot more complex. So your master plan calls for a couple of mixed-use districts. For example, on North M24 in the industrial areas, it calls for that to be a mix of commercial and industrial, so you can kind of get those things existing together. And it calls for a couple of village mixed areas near the village. So the idea with having it on here is to try to work to be more consistent with the master plan. Continued map maintenance, it's always a good thing to look at that. Because we did a really large lift this time, we're probably not going to have to do much next year, and it may even be something that gets pushed to another year. And then zoning board of appeals, there's a couple processes in there and standards that could be tightened up. So the big missing hole right there now is any decision any official makes in the administration or interpretation of the zoning ordinance can be appealed to the zoning board of appeals. Basically, I say, this is what I think this means. You're not going to get a zoning permit. They can appeal that decision to the zoning board of appeals to have it overturned. Your zoning ordinance doesn't have criteria for the ZBA to look at now, so it's kind of a free-for-all. There is language that many communities have that's based on circuit court review, so we recommend putting something like that in there, because if there's an appeal of a decision, there's already tensions high, and it's good to have criteria to start to look at to try to focus the review. And that's what we have. Our intention originally was to get this list to the body next month, but as I mentioned, we had meetings, pre-development meetings with a couple of folks, and it looked like it would behoove the township to get started on these a little bit faster. That's the shortest version I could do.
But and the reality of it is, we need funding to move this forward, and we need to make a recommendation for that funding to the township board.
Yes.
So that's kind of what the motion is going to be. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
Well, I want to know. Now we've had Zach present it. If he does want it presented, he may have some questions.
No
I don't know
question.
about the other commissioners yet.
I do have a question, but it might be in your motion.
Well, let's wait a minute. We don't have a motion yet. We have to make a motion for discussion on the motion. All right.
Don't wait.
Do any other commissioners have questions at this time?
No.
All right. Now, Mr. Spiz, if you would like to have Mr. Knoll make a motion, then you can have your discussion.
This is a short one. I move to forward the Ordinance Review Committee zoning ordinance amendment priority list for 2022 to the Township Board with favorable recommendation.
With favorable recommendation. All right, do you have any discussion on that?
I'll second for discussion.
Okay, so wait a minute. I have a motion on the floor by Mr. Knoll, supported by Mr. Spiz, and now we're available for discussion. Go ahead, Mr. Spiz.
What favorable recommendation, what does that mean?
That's what I was going to ask next. John, we might have to identify that a little bit.
Favorable recommendations would mean that we have the funding would be available to complete this work.
All of this work? Group 1, 2, and 3?
Well, some of the work is already funded. The ones that need to be funded.
The ones in yellow are funded?
Yes.
There's approximately, Zach, am I wrong? There's about 6 we're looking for funding on, I think, right? Am I incorrect in that? I mean, we're close with about 6 more, right?
Yeah, so the really big ones are the group 1. We're probably only going to get to group 2 if something stops up.
Yeah, and a couple might be, like you said, with, our mapping, because we went so far with it. So, we went to a lot of the extremes to get to where we are already. I mean, we're not going to look at that probably for at least 2 more years now.
Yeah, well, we created an entirely new zoning district as part of that
mapping. Yeah,
mapping.
we've got a whole new thing going now, so now we're not going to do that. So, I think maybe, do you want clarification on the language?
I have an additional question for Trustee Knoll.
All right.
How does the Township Board normally allocate funds to this activity? Do they do it by hour or do they do it by dollar? Because I know in here, there's a rough estimate on hours, but there's not a dollar. So how does the
What
Township
has
Board
happened
do
in
it?
the past, Zach puts together an hour amount. Zach's organization is paid by the hour. Sometimes it's before the work can get done, the hourly rate is renegotiated. So the hours go into the board, and the board approves the hours for Zach's.
So does Zach have the ability to negotiate it?
Let's say that.
That's way above my pay grade.
Let's
I
just say
can't
it would
even see that
be
with the
through
ladder.
Zach's firm.
Firm,
Okay.
yes.
Because
So-
it wouldn't be just to pay Zach.
So would it behoove us to put a target number of hours into your resolution versus favorable recommendations? So we're requesting 80 or 200 hours, what's important? I think that'd be something.
Yeah, what I'll say is this process is a little bit different than what it has been in the past. So previously, Carlisle Wortman, you would tell us to do this thing, and we'd usually do it off in our office. Yeah. And the only time we were on site was to do zoning permits, planning commission, and meet with folks. Supervisor Curtis has worked some changes with us, so I'm actually in the building Tuesdays and Thursdays the whole day. And so it's to answer counter questions, to do pre-application meetings, and if I'm here and I don't have anything, I would be working on these in that time. So it's slightly different because if I'm going to be here, I'm going to be working on something. It's going to be this or something else. So.
Wait, maybe what we should do is ask for a number of hours not to exceed. And then I mean,
Not counting meetings.
that way we're looking at something to the Township Board with a limit. And then
I'd like to suggest that we vote on the motion that we have.
first,
Yea or nay, and then I'll make a new motion if it's a nay vote.
Thank you. Your turn.
Oh, I guess.
All right,
Why
now-
would we not just amend the current motion?
hang
Well,
on.
because then it's a cleaner process if you vote down the original motion and make a clean motion. Otherwise, you have to vote on the amendment, then you have to vote on the original motion.
She's saying let's
I know
deny
what
this.
you're saying, I just never seen it done that way before.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor. We're going to call a question. There's a motion on the
You
floor.
are the chair.
We're going to call a question. So, all those in favor say aye. Seeing none, motion failed. I'm not going to even ask the name.
Mr.
All right, if you'd like to amend your, now if you'd like to,
I want to keep dialogue going. Mr. Spiz has suggested that possibility of not to exceed 225 hours for the group of work here. And a fundamental addition class that Mr. Spiz performed was 204. We'll round it up to include meetings and suffice to say 225
hours,
Yes.
not to exceed.
not to exceed.
So could you just kind of explain the motion again for me? So
I'd be more than happy just to repeat, to make a motion.
Okay.
Yeah, read it word for word.
This was just
Yeah.
conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I move to forward to the Ordinance Review Committee zoning ordinance amendment priority list for 2022 to the Township Board with favorable recommendations of not to exceed 225 hours for Carlisle and Workman's work.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Mr. Knoll and seconded by Mr. Spiz. Does everybody understand the motion? Mr.
Yeah.
Turner and everyone? Okay. Mr. Bill, okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion was approved. Susan, you got that? Thank you. Next on the agenda is communications and/or committee reports. So is there anybody from the planning commission with any communications they would like to stipulate or make at this time? Let's ask them individually. Mr. Turner, do you have anything you'd like to
No.
say? Mr. Billy?
No, sir.
Mr. Spiz?
Thank you. I don't believe so.
Thank you.
Well, I'm just wondering if there's
I
anything.
thought it got warm in here.
Just wondering if there's a county I need to bring up, but I don't think so.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Knoll?
No, sir.
I have none at this time.
I have,
Oh, you do?
I do.
Thank you.
Yes, I just wanted everybody to know that if you're wondering why somebody is sitting next to me, this is Danielle Smith. She is Jack's administrative assistant, and she's here tonight to see how the planning commission works, and if
Oh.
there's a time that I can't be here, that she can learn.
So she had to be here for this meeting to see how we work. Okay, that was a little creative.
It's only an hour now. What is it?
A little bit creative, okay. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan, for that introduction.
I do have
Oh,
one.
now Mr. Spiz comes back. Mr. Spiz?
Sorry, I thought I'd give a quick update on the Gypsy Moth
Oh, all right.
program that the county put together that I know Oxford's going to participate, because I did have a discussion with Rick Wright about the topic, but if everybody recalls, the county did approve, I believe it was $250,000 for the Gypsy Moth program in the entire county. Oxford is intended to participate in that. It's going to be a reimbursable grant program of not to exceed $30,000 per CDT. We're finalizing the details. We're expecting to roll that out with MSU Extension in the next couple weeks, so that everybody within Oakland County will be able to apply for that grant
Oh,
or reimbursement.
until money's run out.
So money's around, first come, first served.
That's how it works. Okay, thank
So it
you.
helps save some of those trees in the south. of the-
Thank you, Mr. Spiz. Are there any other comments or of any other things at this time? Seeing none. Do we have any planner or engineer reports? Mr. Sharp, do you have anything for reports that you'd like to make comments?
Sure, I can mention a couple things.
Oh,
Kind of repair.
Sure.
no. What kind of roof you have?
That is a very smooth asphalt roof. It just appears to be a portion of it metal.
Good.
So you're clear on that, Mr. Berger.
I just thought I'd throw that out there, Tony.
Why are you picking on it? Just planning commission, you can expect to, over the next, I don't know if it'll make it to the meeting in 2 weeks, it might be a month.
Yeah.
But there's a couple site plans that are working their way through. One of them is for JT Electric. They're looking to do a building expansion up on their property up there. So that is in the review process right now. And then the Enclaves Phase 2, which is the duplex condominium development that is currently going up by the Abbey Ridge Apartments. They have submitted for their the second phase, which is on the south side of Market Street. It butts up kind of to the golf course.
And as a quick comment in regards to that, thanks for bringing that up. That's only basically because theirs did expire. I don't think they're even trying to amend anything within the plan. They had
Basically-
original- It's the same plan, isn't it?
It is, they broke it into two just for the ease of everything,
one,
for the
phase two.
condominiums and so forth, but it is essentially the same plan that they had originally come forward with, and then they
Right.
pulled out the south half of it.
Yeah, so I like what Zach said earlier about trying to get a longer timetable put together for people with plans. Because sometimes, like I said, just time runs faster than people think. Thanks.
So that's all I have, unless anybody has any additional questions or wants to
I'm not
hit
picking
me on
on
my roof.
I'm not picking on
Existing non-conforming.
Zach, you got any comments to make?
I'm glad you got to mention some of the things I was going to mention that time, because I do that to him all the time in reviews. The only thing I have to add is that we've received the Phantom Fireworks permit. As you'll recall, last year this body approved extended hours beyond what the zoning ordinance says, as long as it's for phantom fireworks at the same location at the bowling alley. It's at the same location, so it's just going to be reviewed and approved internally, myself and fire chief. So you guys won't see that review, but you will be able to buy fireworks there if it's approved. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Now we're actually into commissioners' comments or comments from the building official. I see him sitting in the audience tonight. Do you have any comments?
None at
Would you
this
like to
time.
make, Mr. London?
Maybe we should introduce.
Yeah.
No, oh, doesn't everybody know Mr. London at this point? Mr. London, please come up to the podium. Timothy London is the new building official for Oxford Township, hired in the first part of November, and is now in the administrative role in that position. I don't know if you know all the commissioners or not. They're not all here tonight. There's two absent. He was at a previous meeting that we did introduce him at, and maybe Mr. Spitz.
That was probably gone.
Yeah, you found him on, maybe. Okay.
I'm just trying to follow.
We're bringing that up.
Trying to follow after my mentor. Sitting
Oh,
to my left.
boy, oh, boy. To his left. I heard what he said. So, Mr. London, Mr. Spitz, Mr. Knowles, Mr. Turner, and Mr. Bailey.
Hello.
And a couple absentees tonight, so, and Mr. Berger, which I think you know.
Pleasure to meet you.
Yeah,
Welcome aboard.
all right. We've already heard from the zoning administrator, unless you have anything more, which I don't
No.
think you do. And do we have anything from our recording secretary? Anything else that you want?
got it, all right.
I think we have it from her. I think now what we have is adjournment in order at
I
8:07.
do have one additional comment.
No, you don't. We've already
You're
adjourned.
not on the record, you know.
You really got to smack that gavel fast.
Well, that wasn't, you need a gavel. This is not a gavel. I don't know what this is. It's not a gavel.
Well, that's a speaker, so it's-